The Poet Speaks podcast is sponsored by the Poetry Lab. Poetry Lab partners attend a monthly workshop led by a teaching artist who represents a fresh new voice in the writing world. The goal, now more than ever, is to hold space for poets to write, read, and craft their learning journeys in a supportive community. And it's only $35 a month. Sign up at thepoetrylab.com/lab partners. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome back to the Poet Speaks podcast, the #1 spoken word poetry podcast in the world. And today we have a very, very special guest. Having won the Poetry Africa 2021 Slam Jam competition, our next guest will be representing South Africa at the World Poetry Slam Championship 2022 in Brussels. He's a multi-award winning writer, performer, social activist, new media artist, applied theater practitioner, and producer obsessed with how to use innovative creativity for healing and therapy. Most recently, he created the Augmented Reality exhibition, Remember Your Descendants, which examines how young South Africans relate to their ancestors and descendants. This premiered in Paris at the NewImages Festival alongside his first projection mapping installation, Chosi Chosi, as well as the Fak'ugesi Festival in Johannesburg. As a future African grant recipient, he will also be creating his first 360-degree film, Black Boy Meets Boogeyman, where he examines how to turn toxic masculinity into compassionate masculinity. Everyone, please welcome to the podcast, Xabiso Vili. Xabiso, how are you?
Hey, I'm well, thank you. Yourself?
I'm doing pretty good, Now, I said your name correctly, right? Xabiso.
No, so it's interesting. It's from Xhosa, it's a Xhosa name. So that X is a side kick. So you put your tongue to like the side of your mouth and you kind of like pull it out. So you go Xabiso.
Xabiso.
It's part of a family of clicks in South Africa and Xhosa. So you've got the X, which is the, you've got the Q, which is the, you've got the C, which is the, and then sometimes you have the R, but they don't really come out in names much, but it's a from the back of your throat.
Word. Okay, so I completely flubbed that. Please forgive me. Everyone, welcome to the podcast, Xabiso Vili. There we go.
Hey,
he deserves the grand introduction. There we go. All right, so Xabiso, tell us where you at right now. Now, people from reading from your introduction and then also, from your wonderful accent, maybe some people have a clue, but please tell us where you at right now. Where's your location in the world?
I am in Johannesburg, South Africa, at the moment. Just hanging out. It's a beautiful sunny day as we slowly head towards winter. Just taking it easy out here.
Word. That's lovely to hear. So tell us, what is South Africa like? We've actually had a guest from South Africa on the show. Some folks that listen to the show are in South Africa. We have some South African fans. Tell us, what is South Africa like? More specifically, what is the spoken word poetry scene out there like in South Africa?
Yeah, definitely. I did listen to that podcast with Angela, right?
Yes, Angela. Yeah.
That was a great one. What is South Africa like? What is the South African spoken word scene like? I think so. South Africans always have this thing where we're like, yo, guys, South African poets, they're the best in the world. The world just needs to hear them to kind of catch up, you know? So I think that there's a lot of pride around the spoken word. This is around the spoken word scene, around spoken word, around poetry in South Africa. There's a lot of competition as well, which also kind of hones and sharpens each other. I grew up in a different kind of slam scene back like in 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, when I was still coming up. It was very, very competitive, very cutthroat, with multiple slams, with word and sound, with the cuddle sessions, which wasn't as cutthroat because that was like a direct response to the cutthroatness of the word and sound, which was like a lot more hard and a lot more contained. We had the Tswane Speak Out Loud. We had multiple slams happening all across Johannesburg. KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, also down in the Western Cape in Cape Town. I think those were and kind of still are the three kind of central hubs of poetry when you look in South Africa. Also, the scene is very innovative as well, right? I think there's in the slam culture, there's been this kind of like focus on the 3 minutes. You got your 10 seconds like leeway. You don't have no props. You don't have no music, just you and the mic. And though we do have maybe some slams that kind of follow those similar rules, there's a lot of slams that are also very innovative, right? Where they like bring in your music, bring in your video, bring in your props. How do you create a play or a performance?
Yes, yeah.
The slam scene. And so with the innovation, even during lockdown, when things kind of shut down, a lot of the South African poets immediately kind of transitioned to the digital space. Slams themselves, Word and Sound did a digital slam. And so we were already now thinking around writing the poem, but we were also thinking around how does the poem relate visually? How do you now to create a video and a story for the poem itself? So it's very, the scene in South Africa is very innovative. It's very fresh. It's very multilingual as well, which I think doesn't only show in the many different languages used, but I think also shows in the many different ways topics are approached, right? I think that knowing different and multiple languages allows you to think in different multiple ways. And so there's a lot of interesting connections that happen in language and in belief and in culture. We have to be here to experience it, you know? It's like, it's one of those.
I'm curious then, for y'all in South Africa, do you find yourself traveling up northwards to Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana to go, whether it be a poet experiencing the poetry scene, the art scene up in these different places all throughout Africa? Or do you find people that are from South Africa, they stay in South Africa? What is your kind of thought process on that for those that are not from Africa, that don't live there? What is that like? Is South Africa very separate and centralized from all the other countries, the numerous countries in Africa?
That's a really good question. I would say yes and no. And I think it's multi-layered because there's so many dimensions to it, you know? So for example, I'll speak for myself personally, and I've only really toured poetry in Africa, like even in the SADC region, so like the Southern African region, right? But then I've ended up touring like poetry like to the rest like of the world more than I have across the continent and heading up north. And I think that's also like it's an issue of funding, you know? It's like, where does the money come in? Who's got the money to pay us to tour and to travel? And quite often you'll find it's in America or it's in Europe, you know, which is really unfortunate. But I also think that there are certain poets who are making strides kind of more north upwards. I know there's the Radioactive Poetry blog in Bloemfontein that have got a really good partnership going on with a refugee camp in Malawi, and they do like yearly trips up there. I know there's the Fak'ugesi Festival as well in Nigeria, and there's been really good South African partnerships happening over there as well. Recently there was the African World Championships as well that happened. Was it this year? It was last year. I think it was last year. And so there's a lot of interesting links there as well. And we've got Current State of Poetry here in Johannesburg that has great links with the African World Cup of poetry. But also, with that being said, I think that there isn't enough kind of cross-continental conversations happening. And I also think that South Africa, one thing that I've noticed, also kind of almost like there's this regard of South Africa as being like, this place that's removed from Africa, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that kind of narrative and that kind of conversation can also carry across the poetry spaces. I mean, one example will be when I was competing in the Poetry Africa Slam Jam, which I mean, understandably was a slam for South Africans because they're trying to find a South African representative. But also it's tricky because even during that Slam Jam, there were multiple African artists that I'm familiar with who were kind of complaining about feeling ostracized from Poetry Africa. You know, Poetry Africa had done like a really great job of getting as many African poets as possible, and you're not going to be able to reach everybody. But there's still that underlying issue of like, South Africa is separate. And I don't think it was necessarily like a dig at Poetry Africa. I think it's a dig at a poetry culture that doesn't necessarily always engage with the rest of the continent, right? So I think there's work to be done there.
For sure, for sure. No, I as an African myself, I'm Nigerian. I do see the kind of the lack of cross-continental maybe collaboration partnership. Specifically, I guess I would say, like you said, with South Africa, there, I don't know what it is, but there seems to be like a mindset of South Africa is a different part of Africa. It's not, you know what I mean? So I think that is very interesting. As someone as yourself, you live there, and you've seen that, and you've grown up with it, whatever may have you. So you were born in Eastern Cape, South Africa, correct? Yes. So your culture is a heavy part of your work, from what I've been able to, I'm a fan myself. What I've been able to watch, what people put me onto of what you've been doing. For you, what oral traditions or indigenous South African or just in general African traditions do you speak on through your writing?
Yeah, it's again multi-layered answer.
Yeah.
Because I mean, obviously being born in the Eastern Cape, I'm also Xhosa. I'm a Xhosa man who's gone through like initiation school and gone like to the mountain, but also like what connotations does that kind of come with, and how does one kind of balance those connotations? So I find that I don't write as much Xhosa poetry as I allow for my Xhosaness to exist like within the work, or perhaps even not even my Xhosaness, my critique of, sometimes as well. So I think that for me, one of the things that like kind of stands out and that comes immediately to mind is around this concept and this idea of masculinity, and reframing what Xhosa masculinity is. I think there's a very particular toxic representation of Xhosa masculinity that one picks up, especially having come back from the initiation school and coming back from the mountain. And so I think for me, there's a constant like subversion of that, but also like still like showcasing that this is still part of the culture, that this is still a Xhosa man, this is still a representation of. I also think that I carry a lot of my storytelling practice is based off Xhosa culture. We have these things called zinso, that we grow up with, which are these stories, this folklore that is told around a fire, that carries history, that carries identity. And so even when you were mentioning the projection mapping project, Chosi Chosi, that I did in Paris, that's Chosi Chosi is like a call to storytelling. So we'll say Chosi Chosi, and then somebody will respond course, and it's like kala kala songs at the beginning of the story. And so that's a call to like sit and to share stories. And so I'm interested in how tradition, in how culture meet right now in this moment in time with innovation, with these new forms of storytelling? What becomes the new fire that we kind of sit around and we share stories around? Yeah, and I think for me, like when it comes to being Xhosa and existent in this moment and through my work, it's a constant kind of navigation and discovery, uncovering new ways of understanding and new ways of interacting with the world. I think what really kind of shines out for me is within almost like Afrofuturism and magical realism and speculative fiction. That I can really pull from my culture to reimagine or reinvent or to kind of shift slightly new ways of envisioning and imagining what it means to live as a Xhosa man in 2022. Not even just, like not even counting as a Black man, as an African man, as a South African man, and all, the layers and the textures of identity. And so, yeah, there's a multitude of navigation that I think writing and art has afforded me the capacity to interrogate.
Absolutely. I love that. For you, and I'm very curious, what do you think is the biggest misconception people have about your culture, whether it be African peoples, our indigenous tribes that we're from, like you said, as a Xhosa man? What do you think is the biggest misconception people have now that you've performed, given this culture, talked about your culture in places like Paris, all over the world? What is the biggest misconception you think people have?
What is the biggest misconception people have about Xhosa people? I think that misconception is that there is one type of Xhosa man, it's the stick fighting Xhosa initiate who is Ibuda. I think that the representation of a Xhosa man is very one-dimensional. And look, stereotypes exist, and even within that stereotypes, you'll find moments of truth. But I also think that because this one-dimensional representation of a Xhosa man exists, it doesn't allow Xhosa man to dive deeper in themselves, to uncover other aspects of themselves that they might resonate with, other aspects of masculinity that they might resonate with. I'm thinking of a particular evening. Where I was out. My friend had just had an opening night for a show, and we had gone out to celebrate. And so as we're celebrating, we're sitting at this bar, and somebody says at a different table, says, "Me as a Xhosa man," and everybody at our table goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what do you mean you as a Xhosa man?" Already now is, it's conflict, and the guy's like, no, let me explain, And he says that me as a Xhosa man, he was speaking to somebody who was a bit more flamboyant in their masculinity and a bit more expressive, and was saying, as a Xhosa man, I don't get to be this flamboyant. I don't get to be this expressive. So how do you get to this point? And so as he's trying to explain this lady kind of picks up like the argument with him and says, "No, but you can't come here and express that you are a Xhosa man. Some of us are going to have response, and obviously we're going to have a response to this." And so for me, I really felt like in that argument and in the argument that she was having, there was kind of a lost moment of discovery for him, because there's this like expectation that if you're going to be speaking of a Xhosa man, it's going to be that toxic representation of the Xhosa man that's coming up. And then there was now the secondary, in his searching for knowing, there's this kind of secondary prevention of that knowing because he didn't use the correct terminology, and he can't come out here and say it, like out loud like that. And you must follow the protocol, and you must appease our senses, whereas I think that his point was completely lost because I understood what he was saying, because there's a particular way of masculinity we are expected to represent as Xhosa men when we come from the mountain, that when you discover other forms of masculinity, you kind of become perplexed and confused because nobody ever told you that you could interact in this particular way, you know? And so yeah, I mean, I had a chat with them later on in the evening. But I do think that misconception really does lead to a lot of damage and a lot of harm around, or that one representation of Xhosa-ness and Xhosa masculinity does lead to a lot of harm.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Wow. Okay. Very, very powerful words right there. Absolutely. So I want to talk tours. Let's talk tours. So you toured with your one-man show, Black Boy B, through India, and your Remember Your Descendants tour of America. So tell the audience a little bit, tell about your experiences and what has that meant to you to touch so many parts of the globe with your own original work, talking about, you know, who you are, your indigenous identity, the Xhosa man, all those things. What has that meant for you going to places like India? I mean, all over the Americas. What has that meant for you? And tell about a little bit about the experience. How did you put those things together, especially in I'm really India, especially a place like India. Tell us a little bit about that.
Word. Yeah. So India was a wild trip. Was a wild trip. At the time of that trip, we had started a writing organization called Scribe Writes with a friend of mine, Lebu, who is in South Korea at the moment, and then another friend, Manola Gayatri, who was from India, and I'd met through the university and through the loss of a friend. And so we had all the three of us kind of come together through this loss of a friend and started this writing group. And then through this writing group, we kind of got some funding both from the university and some universities in India as well, to then kind of run a 3-month tour through India. And so we had wild things on the itinerary, speaking engagements at various universities. I spent a week with a theater group that like had kind of based their theater off like kung fu and different types of martial arts.
Wow.
It was wild. But it was also interesting because in touring Black Boy B, and so Black Boy B was my first one-man show, which was like kind of tapping into, again, what does Black masculinity mean, and what does it look like, and how do I make sense of it for myself, and how do I make sense of it for others? And I had arrived at a time in India when mob justice had just killed, like, I think 2 Nigerian men for like just Black in India, you know? And so it was a wild time to be deeply interrogating my Blackness within a space where also Blackness was how would you say, it was not just other, but it was something like not often seen. It was something like to be wondered at, you know. I remember I tell the story of going on this hike, right? And we're going like, I think, was it like, how many meters was it? It was like 10,000 meters up, because there was this blooming lily that only blooms like once a month in a year. And so people come from all over the world, from all over India, from all over the world to watch this lily. But this lily only blooms in this one mountain, like at this particular altitude, right? And so it's quite a rare lily, the Shiroi lily. And I remember, you know, going on this hike, and as you're getting higher, it's like kind of getting mistier and mistier, you know, so you can't really see a lot of people around you. And I'm like walking with my friends, hung over from like rice beer from the previous night at the Shiroi Lily Rock Festival, but then eventually we get to the top, and like now the wind is blowing, so the fog starts clearing, and now you can like find and see these lilies, and you can take pictures of them. And I remember, I remember like taking pictures, but then looking up and seeing people taking pictures in my direction. And then I'm like, looking for the flower. And then people coming up to me like, oh yeah, no, can I take a picture? And then now they're taking pictures of me instead of the lily. And it's the conversation, where you from? Oh, South Africa, I've got a friend in Kenya. Maybe you know them,
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting for me realizing that as a Black person in India, I was rarer than the Shiroi lily, which was also mirrored by another poet friend in India. So they were a mixture of Indian and I think Ghanaian. But they had lived in India their whole life. And they also, when I told them that story, told me about a story where there's like this 1,000, what do you call these things? A 1,000-pillar temple, right? So it's got these pillars like thousands of years old, and like thousands of the pillars are holding this temple up, and like they all have these ancient carvings, and people go there, and you have to pay a certain amount to be able to take a certain amount of pictures, and he had gone to see this 1,000-pillar temple. And then people would also come up to him and ask him if they can take a picture. But he said that he just started charging people the pillar for pictures. So he just showed there and made some money that day. So it was a really, it was a really interesting experience. Also being in a country where you don't know the language, like I've done America, I've done, like the UK and Europe, like with tours. And it's always a little easier because people speak English anyway, Whereas if you want to get like daily things done in India, if you want to grab an auto to like the next place, like nobody on the ground is really speaking English unless you're at a poetry reading or you're in a university. So that was for me almost like the first time I felt very, very overtly and consistently kind of like the other. There are moments when it happens because racism in South Africa. There are moments when it happens in South Africa, but at least here we're still like majority, and like we're very fiery and like kind of revolutionary. So if I'm gonna be like, hey yo, don't you dare other me, I'm gonna have people who are gonna be there, who are gonna back me up. It was a first for me to be like within a minority in that way. Which was wild. I think it reminded me of the necessity of the work that I was doing and why it was so important to share and write those stories.
Absolutely. I've been on tour to Nepal, and I can completely understand what you mean. You had said a phrase. You had said, I was more, as a Black person, I was more rarer than like the lily that you than the lily that was famous in that country, that only happens like one time out of the year, very rarely to see this lily. But you were more rarer than that flower, being a Black person. Isn't that's really something? That's a very powerful statement, really, kind of, if you really think about the kind of that's very powerful. Like you kind of wonder what's up with that, saying that the global majority is Black and brown people, Black people. How is it that you feel, how is it that you would ever feel othered? But it happens so much. And I had a very similar experience when I went on tour to Nepal. People would literally come up to me riding, they would stop their car in the middle of the street, get out of the car, and they'd start be like, oh my God, take a picture with me, take a picture. It was insane. It was actually insane. So I completely, I can relate on that one. But no, I think it's amazing, when you are still able to connect that message to those different corners of the earth, it does reinstate that message that you're trying to send to people. So I really vibe with that. I really dig it, and I really appreciate it. So tell us a little bit about, talk about your African contemporary lounge and spoken word fusion album. So first and foremost, and I'm sure many other people, that's a whole new genre, African contemporary lounge. Please explain what that is. Now the album is called Eating My Skin. Tell us about, first off, that genre, and then tell us about that title, Eating My Skin. That was the name of your album.
Yeah, yeah. Um, African contemporary lounge is a term that we kind of came up with when we were creating the album, you know. It was just a bunch of Africans chilling, like creating like this almost like lounge aesthetic music, but like also for like our times. So in kind of coming up with the genre title, we really listened to the music we were creating, and it was like, so like, what is this, and what has inspired us to kind of create this. It was made for, I mean, especially the instrumentals were very like easy listening, because the words and the vocals really were not, you know. So I'm always kind of interested in that juxtaposition. And so if you listen to the instrumentals, then you can really, like, it is lounge. It's something that you would play in like a, you know, a nice little hotel lobby, but like also like really fun, you know, and like really very new and fresh, and very still carrying a very distinct flavor of South Africa, you know. But yeah, with then leading into kind of the lyrics and like the juxtaposition of poetry and the lounge music, Eating My Skin came before Black Boy B, the one-man show. I pulled some poems actually from Eating My Skin and put them into Black Boy B. But Eating My Skin starts off, and it tells the story, again, it starts off with Tos and Gensom, Tos. And it starts off with this story of a man who so loved his skin that he peeled all of it off just so he could go on a date with it.
Wow.
When he on the date, he fell even deeper in love with it that he actually started eating it. And once he had eaten it, he realized that flesh could not exist without skin, and thus the man died in his love of his skin, right? And so for me, it was an exploration of learning to love myself, in my skin, and finding even within the moments of dying, and how often people with skin like ours do die, finding those moments of beauty. So it wasn't running away or hiding from the death, but rather facing it head on and kind of saying that I love the skin despite you know. And yeah, so Eating My Skin then led into Black Boy B. So after learning to love my skin for myself, then I was like, how do I learn to love this skin and this blackness and this maleness in relation to society and everything else that exists around me? Yeah. So there's been there's a thread, you know, that kind of runs across the work, from the album to the show to the book to now these more extended reality projects that I'm playing around with.
That's very interesting. So your work all kind of has that synchronous kind of trail and path to it. Do you feel like you do that purposely, or is that just something subconsciously where it's naturally flowing out of you, that everything links up together?
So I think now that I've become aware of it, I'm like a lot more like purposeful in doing it. But also it only for me occurred like maybe by like the fourth project, right? So when I done the album, then the show, and then the book, and then I did the Augmented Reality project. Then I think after that, I kind of took a step back and I was like, oh yes, look at this thread. But also that was around the time when I was also considering very deeply what my over of work will look like. If, you know, like 50, 60 years from now, I kind of sit back and I look at everything that I've created. What will that thing be, you know?
For sure.
And so even in that consideration, not just the work, but also who do I want to be, and how do I have want to have engaged with society and this community. So at first but also it happened naturally, because I'm a person that really does believe that the previous project will kind of determine the next project that you do. I don't think that any ideas for projects I have are kind of like pulled out of thin air, but they're always kind of building on top of each other. And also because poetry is such a deeply personal thing, it will always relate to whichever journey you as an individual are going through. And so I think that also shows in the work, you know. So cool. Eating My Skin, Black Boy B, that kind of deals with race, and also with the state of race and connection to masculinity. Then I had Laughing in My Father's Voice, where I realized that a lot of my traumas were also like inherited when I was doing the previous work in the show. And so I started looking into the inheritance and where I'm getting these kind of traumas from. And then I had Remember Your Descendants, which then kind of even went deeper with the inheritance. So instead of just like, you know, my dad or my mom, or this is what I'm giving to my brothers, or this is what I'm receiving from the present right now, it kind of went into like deeper spiritual inheritance. So what have I gained from my ancestors, and what do I want to give to my descendants? What have others gained from their ancestors, and what do they want to give to their descendants? And what kind of ancestors will we look like? Which then was interesting, because I then got commissioned for Chosi Chosi for the projection mapping in Paris. And the commission like just ran so parallel to like the work that I was already exploring, you know? And so in that moment, I then was able to explore what the many faces of South Africa and an imagined Africa might look like across time. So in the past, in the present, and in the future. And so that was a really interesting exploration of story and of storytelling. Right now, with Black Boy Meets Boogeyman, is a very interesting kind of time for me, right? Because it's like, okay, cool. So here is the ancestor that I want to become. What is the work that is then required of me to become that ancestor, right? And so Black Boy Meets Boogeyman catches me in a time when I'm doing like a lot of personal development work, you know. Homie picking up some therapy, homie finishing his post-grad in applied theater, you know, to figure out how to use the arts more intentionally around healing and community development. Also being very cognizant that the internal work isn't enough, that there is an external work that needs to be done. And so being cognizant of the toxicity that one can carry with masculinity. And for me, there's a particular shift in society that needs to happen for my ultimate ancestral self to be able to exist, and to be able to exist, you know, like comfortably. And so there's a shift in toxic masculinity that needs to happen, right? And so then I find myself creating this virtual reality film to address that work, you know. And yeah, and also I'm also sitting now kind of writing a play around flamboyant Black boys with dukes, because that's the almost the or flamboyant Black boys with head wraps, because that's almost like that's one of the images that I see when I think of my ancestral self and what they might look like physically represented. So yeah, there is thought in how all of the work links. but I also don't know what it will eventually look like, you know? So
Yeah.
I can't put in too much thought. I also do need to let it happen naturally, because I think that will give the most honest representation of how I lived through the work.
Absolutely. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So, my goodness, it's been such an amazing interview so far. You're telling so many amazing stories and we're learning so much about you, your work, your amazing, amazing work. So, as we're wrapping up, I have two final questions for you. First one, what do you think people can take away from spoken word poetry?
Mm, mm. I think, okay, I'll give you the answer of what I've taken away. And also this is also the name of my company. And so this has been my takeaway that I like then turned into my company.
Mm,
Um, my company is called Sizinsomi. So remember, like I was telling you earlier on about the Insomi, which are the stories we tell around the fire that hold the history. Sizinsomi means that we are those stories. And so for me, what spoken word poetry has reminded me that our stories are important, that our stories make up our identity, that our stories are magic, and there's spells that shift not only ourselves but the world around us. And it's only through telling those stories that we can hope to even start imagining a different future.
mm, mm. Okay. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Woo. All right. Dropping gems with every answer. All right. So, very last question for you. Please tell me, why do you need to get your words out?
Why do I need to get my words out? Because if I didn't, I would choke. I would choke. I would die. It's there's an urgency, man. There's an urgency in me that requires these stories to be told. Um, if if not for helping others, then for helping myself, you know. It's the only way I've ever been able to make sense of the world, to relate to my peers, to relate to myself and like my own emotions.
Hmm.
So it's a it's like, why does the heart beat? Why does the blood flow? And so for me, it's that it's urgent. It's urgent.
Absolutely. He has an urgency to get his words out. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right, Abiso, thank you so much for this amazing interview thus far. I've loved talking to you. It's been a pleasure to finally get to meet you. Connecting the work to the person is always a great, great thing. So, such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. So tell us, what is your 2022 looking like and beyond? And where can folks come check out all of the amazing work that you're doing, your website, all that good stuff?
Word. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amanda, for having me. It's been fun. It's been fun. I always enjoy talking about the work. And also it puts it back into perspective for myself. We're so busy living in it that we forget to
Yeah.
take a step back and be like, oh yeah, this is the thing that I'm doing. What is 2022 looking like? First of all, a homie needs to get some rest. I think I'm encourage everybody to take care of themselves, to make sure that they are getting some rest time, that they are breathing. But then after the rest, let's see. I'm gonna be doing some playback theater performances in July and August, but that's gonna be in the Northern Cape. So if y'all around, y'all can jump onto my social media to see the Northern Cape in South Africa. But then in August, hopefully I'm going to be in Leeds. I'm still confirming my dates for Leeds, but I'll be in Leeds for about a week. I've got a seed commission there. I need to be
Ah,
doing some research. So I'll also update that on my social media. I'm gonna be in Berlin for the African Book Festival at the end of August.
Nice.
I'll update that as well. I'm gonna be in Brussels at the end of September as well for the World Poetry Championship. I'm gonna be in Durban for Poetry Africa in October. And then there's another possibility of another trip in October, but everybody can check out all the information on all my social media, Xabiso Vili, across all social media. You can Google me, you'll find whatever you need to know. I'm currently working with a draft website. I'm still editing it, but you can check it out at www.xabisovili.epizY.com, epizy.com, xabisovili.epizy.com. And then, yeah, hopefully later on this year, it will turn into xabisovili.com, but we're still maneuvering it and getting it like just in exactly where it needs to be. But yeah, those are, I think that's everything that comes to mind for now. Oh yes, then it's also gonna be Black Boy Meets Boogeyman will be coming out in September. And will be coming out at various festivals and in various spaces. So keep an eye out, go onto the social media, and I'll let y'all know everything that's going down.
Okay, perfect. All right, y'all catch him if you can. He's going to be everywhere to the end of the year. All right, catch this man if you can. All right. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Xabiso. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you and meet you. Big thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you for having me, and hello and goodbye to everybody listening in.
All right, so everyone go check out Xabiso's work. His work will be in the description box of the YouTube page of this, the YouTube page podcast, the Poet Speaks podcast. Look us up on YouTube. All of his links and information will be in the details below in the description page, okay? So everyone, a big thanks to Xabiso for being on the podcast today. We had such a great time. And everyone, this is the Poet Speaks podcast. Again, we are the #1 spoken word poetry podcast in the world. We'll talk to you soon. All right, everyone? Bye-bye.